What's that true story you have that nobody believes? Also occurring in South Africa a few years back, a friend and I were left behind at a bar and had to walk home about 12 kms. About 2 kms from home my friend and I see a dark shadow on the pavement and recognize it as a Rottweiler loose on the street. It looked up, Cujo style, and started to chase us. There was a road to the right between us and the dog and we both ran down there with the Rottweiler in hot pursuit. Suddenly the dog stops, squeals and turns and runs away from us. Just then we see a lot of commotion between us and the dog. It was an owl attacking the dog. Once the dog ran off, the owl landed on a telephone pole right next to us and stared down at us as we walked home. Since then I've always loved owls and feel indebted to them. There's an old Welsh folk tale about a woman turned into an owl as a punishment. It's said that owls are kind to humans in the hope that the curse will one day be broken. I was on a plane once with the Dalai Lama and everyone was just boarding. We were flying out of Tasmania so there was no first class. But maybe he doesn't fly first class anyway, would be a bit hypocritical. Anyway, it turns out that we had to go past each other in the center aisle. He walked towards me and I was thinking, which side am I going to present to him? I can't face my butt toward the DL, so I present my front. Then the DL presents his butt and as we cross paths my wang grazes along his butt. You almost got your piece within. I was helping a random old man at the Han River lift this uber heavy table and a mosquito landed on my hand. Little bastard was about to bite me right between the knuckles and a dragonfly landed on my hand and ate it. Thanks bro. I signed up to join the military about 11 years ago, and the last test of the day at processing was the hearing test. I failed the test but thought it was a fluke because I had just gone to a loud concert a few days before, so I asked them to let me take again. Again I failed, so the guy running it said to me, you should get checked out by a specialist. You may still be able to do this MOS if you qualify for a waiver. So, I go to an ear-nose throat specialist. It's a hot lady doctor. I take her extended hearing test to figure out just how bad my ears are. She fills out her chart, an XY graph that shows frequency and the volume necessary to hear each one, and then she gives me the rundown. A normal graph is just a straight line across T-top. Mine looked like someone had taken a bit out of a cookie, a big dip in the middle, meaning sounds in that frequency range have to be louder for me to hear them. Now, this is the part no one ever believes. The doctor tells me the specific frequency range where my hearing drops out just happens to be the range where the majority of women's voices fall in. Every time I tell that story they think it's a joke. My dad is a retired soldier. He spent a lot of time in some places where things were blowing up pretty close to him with no hearing protection. After getting out of the service he had his hearing checked and got pretty much the same story. He has a really difficult time hearing things in the same sound waves frequency as a woman's voice. I was running a fun run in 5th grade and Steven Seagal flipped me off from his Range Rover. It was weird. One time I dressed up as Steven Seagal and flipped people off. I'm Bill Murray. When I was 9, we lived in a very rural area. I used to head off for hours into the forest by our house and just wander around for fun. One time during the height of winter I had walked the furthest into the forest I ever had before, probably about 2 miles. I found a giant rectangular shaped lump of snow, about the size of a bus, and started running and jumping around on top of it. After about 15 seconds I heard a pounding beneath me. It turns out that it actually was a bus, and there was a man inside it. He looked like a homeless Bob Ross with giant yellow teeth and was screaming furiously at me through the window, which I presume he had pounded on until the snow fell off from in front of it, because I could not see that window when I originally climbed on the snow mound. Needless to say I ran like frick all the way home and told my parents, but they still, to this day, do not believe me. When I was maybe 12, I entered the elevator, alone, to descend to the ground floor of my apartment block. A short while later, before perceiving the end of the descent, I opened my eyes to find myself lying on my back in another apartment block in the complex. To this day even I still look back at the event and wonder to myself if it really happened. It was that freaky. I cannot for the life of me think of any reasonable explanation. After dropping off a homecoming day junior year of HS, I came across a woman covered in blood in the middle of the road in a fairly desolate area. When I came to a stop, The woman walked to the passenger side, opened the door and hopped inside before I could realize the door was unlocked. "Sir, can you please take to a black club?" She was very anxious. I was frozen. "Sure," I said. I began driving towards the highway when, a few minutes later, a police car passed me going the opposite direction and then quickly made a U-turn to come after me. I've never been so happy to be pulled over. The officer asked me if I knew the woman. When I told him no, he asked her to step out of the car and told me I could leave. No explanation of what was going on. Just leave. When I returned to the after party, everyone thought I was full of crap. 100% true. That is the creepiest one I've read here. I invented multimedia computing. I was the first guy to combine digital images and digital audio in a way that came out of a personal computer on demand. Yeah, it was before Windows, before the Apple and color, or sound, except for stupid beeps, before the Amiga had software. It was before men or editors were born, I guess. I've mostly stopped telling people because they just don't believe it. When I was 15, 2 friends and I were fooling around in the woods, exploring, throwing hand axes and stuff. One of my friends threw the axe with all his strength into a tree, and when we went up to the tree to remove the axe we saw that he had managed to split a fly in two by throwing an axe. When I was 7-8 years old and home alone, the phone rang. I took it and it was a woman telling she was from PMS. In Belgium, that's an organization that helps kids with problems at school etc. She repeatedly asks me if I was home alone. After I confirmed, she asks me if I had hair in my balls already. After a few other weird questions, she asks me to take my pants off and gently stroke my dong. Crap, I was really doing this cause I believed she was from PMS. After a few minutes she said thanks and hang up the phone. PMS, preparing kids for the future. I like how you felt the need to describe a porcupine as a spiky cat. It was one of those WTF split seconds. Is that some sort of spiky cat? No, it's a porcupine. My wife and I were doing a 2-day canoe trip down a river we hadn't really seen scouted before. We noticed about halfway through the first day that there was a great blue heron ahead of us on the river. No big deal, they are fairly common. The heron, who we later named Hazel, proceeded to fly ahead of us at our leisurely pace. When she got too far ahead, she would stop and wait. Whenever we came to a fork in the river or a fairly intense section of rapids, we would follow the direction Hazel planned out for us. Her correct pathing helped us avoid a super random 3 to 4 foot mini waterfall, heck on a crappy canoe, a really dangerous mooring attached to a road bridge, and about a dozen rapids that we retrospectively shouldn't have been tackling. By about the 10th safest path that she had guided us down, we decided she was a spirit animal sent to help us on our way. No one believes us. Upvote for Azul, who was probably thinking got to save some more dumb humans. My pet salamander ate an entire grapefruit. Summer 2008, me and the ex were hanging out beneath the Eiffel Tower in Paris one night, and these older rocker looking dudes came up to us and asked us if we spoke English. We said yes, and they were all like, frick, thank God, man. Where's a good place around here to party or get some drinks? We directed them to some places we knew. As they were about to walk away, they asked, hey, you guys wanna come to our show tomorrow night? Me, being all incredulous, asked, I'm sorry, but who are you? Tesla. Unfortunately, we were going out of town that next day and missed free tickets to a Tesla show in Paris. Man, they were cumin at you live and you missed it. One day I hope to be randomly accosted by rockstars. I've been browsing Reddit for years now, but I never felt like I had something to say, until now. I was on my way back to the city from the countryside where my grandparents lived. I was in the middle backseat of a car holding a basket of eggs. At one point, the driver had to brake really hard and one of the eggs came out of the basket and got stuck right in the dashboard compartment below the radio. Now the egg was just stuck there, but it didn't crack. We just took it back out and put it back in the basket. No one would believe it. I found a 4-leaf clover. I even saved it, and when I showed it to people, they said I faked it. But I found it for real. I actually found one a couple weeks ago. I was playing frisbee golf and looked down right at it randomly walking to my disc. I have it in a plastic bag, even though it is just a retarded 3-leaf clover with extra parts like my cousin Steven. This is in NYC. I was walking to my friend's house and I saw the migration of at least 40 squirrels walking single file on a fence, then jump down, cross the street, and go down an alleyway. After finding no information that squirrels do this, I think my friend is right when she said I dreamt it and misremembered it as a real memory. But it was so real. I stepped into an old school, red phone box in a small rural town in southwest England. I was around 12 and needed to phone my parents for a lift. I picked up the receiver, inserted 20p and dialed the number. When I put the receiver to my ear, however, there was no tone. I hang up, then pick it back up and put it to my ear once more. This time I can hear loud dial-up modem tones. I hang up once more. Just as I was about to leave, the phone rings. I pick up, expecting my parents to have dialed back, but when I say hello, a wheezing, terrifying voice responds. To the person in that phono box. Get out now. I ran fast. My guess is that it was a troll who could see you and had previously gotten the phone number for this exact purpose. I found a human hand washed up on the beach. It was missing 2 fingers. For years my wife, then girlfriend, didn't believe me when I told her the reason the doorbell had rung was a man selling fish door to door. Until, a couple of years later, the same guy turned up when she was home alone and tried to sell her prawns. Fucking prawns. I watched my neighbor's dog go from house to house ringing my neighbor's doorbells. He'd just trot up to their doors and jump up on his hind legs to hit the bell, then head to the next house before the homeowner answered the door. They have an electric fence now and I find myself hoping he escapes during a power outage so he can do it again and prove me sane. When I was little, I used to sleep in the top bunk and my brother on the bottom. One night I woke up to hear frantic typing on my VIC-20 keyboard. I thought it was my little brother messing with my computer, and as I had the string cord light by me I looked across the room and turned on the light to try and catch him. But no one was there. Then I was a bit scared and said, "Luke, you awake?" And he goes, "Yeah." What was that typing? Freaked me out. About 3 years later after moving house the same thing happened again. ICL 286 computer. I think I slept for over a year facing the wall at night to avoid eye contact with any ghosts. Whole new meaning to ghostwriter. A group of friends and I decided to go to Walmart to buy kites when we were all stoned. I know this doesn't add much credibility. At around 2 in the morning, we drove out of the city, which isn't hard to do in North Dakota, and came to this farmer's field. We walked down a gravel road maybe 100 feet from the car and took out our kites and began flying them. At one point we saw 2 lights near the horizon that would stay still and then dart off in all directions. Increasingly our amazement turned to fear as it is pitch black out there at night, and it just seemed strange. At one point both the lights came together and shot off across the sky, and this one girl started running back to the car. When we got back to the car we noticed there was another car parked behind ours, which freaked us out even more. This is rural but fricking Egypt land where we surely should have seen a car drive up. We all jumped into the car and as we started our car the car behind us turned his brights on. As we drove back to town this guy stayed on our butt the whole time shining his brights. We slowed down. He'd slow down. We sped up. He sped up. This went on for about 20 minutes until the guy finally just turned and left us alone. The next day in the paper it stated that the Air Force had been doing exercises the night before. Logical explanation: a bunch of teenagers get stoned and fly kites, see military renditions going on in the sky with high-speed jets, get scared, run back to the car. The guy who chased us could have been a local farmer who snuck up on us with his lights off to see what the frick was going on. He gets pee that we're a bunch of city kids getting drunk and stoned near his property and he decides to frick with us. However, at the time we were obviously thinking that we had seen a UFO and that the secret police, or aliens, were coming to erase our memories. I'm calling BS. I'm certain that no one lives in North Dakota. When I was 5 I had a little cardboard book about planes. It must have been British because it included an Avro Vulcan. One day I was at school playing outside. Our school was close to the local airport. Suddenly there was a great roaring noise and I looked up to see a huge triangular plane fly over. It banked slightly to the right, descending, pouring so much smoke from the 4 engines that I thought it might have been in trouble. It disappeared behind the trees behind the school. Even at the age of 5 I could tell it was a Vulcan, same as in my little book. The only problem was, this was New Zealand, so there was no way a British strategic bomber would have been flying past. No one believed me, so over the following years, I learned to keep my mouth shut and not mention it. Then, about 15 years later, I saw a documentary about the opening of the new airport in Wellington, New Zealand. In the 1960s, a Vulcan flew over and did a touch and go on the new runway. Unfortunately, the runway wasn't finished. There were mounds of gravel or dirt at one end, and the Vulcan's undercarriage clipped the mound, damaging it. It flew to a Hakia airbase and made an emergency landing. Apparently, the Vulcan just sat at Hakia for years, as it couldn't take off until its undercarriage was repaired. Eventually parts were sent from the UK and the plane was made airworthy again. It did a tour of the country before it left. I must have seen it fly over on that tour. I wasn't crazy and I wasn't a 5-year-old fibber. Found a Canadian golfer dead in a car. He was on holiday training in Western Australia. The backpacker golfer murderer strikes again. 7-10 split in bowling on a date. In my early 20s on my own, I had a fight with my landlord over him never fixing anything. He locked me out of my apartment. I came back 3 days later ready to get my stuff, but he had thrown it all out the day before on garbage day. 2 weeks later, walking downtown, I see a homeless guy with a shopping cart full of my stuff. I bought back all my shoes, pots and pans, camera, books for $10. A month later, I was at a party and some girl in the kitchen started telling a story she heard about a guy who bought all his stuff back from a street person. I had become an urban legend. The one most people don't believe is true is that I once worked in a boiler room run by the mob. Go on. When I was 16, worked at a small chicken wing place up the street. Business was slow, and I've owned a chicken suit since I was younger, so I offered to be a walking billboard. I walked around all day in this chicken suit, holding a sign handing out flyers. At the end of the day, still in my chicken suit, I walked to the store up the street to buy a drink. On the way back home, I walked by a crowded local bar. As I passed the crowd outside the door, I hear "Hey chicken, frick you." I laughed and kept walking. Then a large man staggers out through the crowd and yells, "That's right, keep walking." Piece of crap. I continued walking, but he ran up and grabbed me. He was screaming in my face. He steps back and takes a slow motion drunken punch. I dodged it, punched him, threw him to the ground, and ran. On my way home, I laughed at how unbelievable the situation was. Okay, I live in NYC. So one evening I was strolling through Central Park. Then suddenly some guy comes up behind me and puts his hands over my eyes and says, "Guess who?" I turn around and I'm like, Bill freaking Murray, except it was some old homeless guy. Then he stabbed me and took my wallet. This pretty much sums up exactly how I imagined living in New York would be. Back in the early 90s, I was a teenager. I met Bruce Willis at a midnight bowling alley outside of Pittsburgh. We bowled a few games and he was a really nice guy. No one freaking believes me. This happened in 1994. Once I turned on the TV to find a silly commercial for makeup geared for teens. Just as I was flipping away, the commercial showed a short clip of Bob Ross saying "color palette." The next channel I ended up on was PBS. Not only was it Bob Ross, it was the exact moment where he says "color palette" I had just seen. I tried to tell my dad and he just rolled his eyes at me. I once saw a little spider monkey beat the living crap out of a large dog with a very tiny baseball bat at a truck stop. One morning I was walking across a bridge no more than a kilometer from start to finish. The fog was so thick that it was impossible to see anything more than 300 feet in front of you. Suddenly a figure appears in the fog ahead walking towards me. As we pass one another I offer a friendly greeting of "Good morning, Satan." He says "Good morning" and keeps walking. We each get about 100 feet further on the bridge when I hear the man yell back, "Did you just call me Satan?" I kept walking. That I saw a blue lobster in a stream in my town once. Likely a crayfish, but nobody believed me. That crap cray. I was 9 or 10-year-old, visiting my grandpa's grave. As I was walking and looking at different graves alone, I stopped and started hearing banging from underground, like if someone was hitting wooden desk. And it clearly was coming from underground. What's even more scary is that I was surrounded by few fresh graves, probably few days old. Creepy as frick, and I actually never tell anybody about it. This is my first time sharing it. You can say kids have wild imagination, but this was too real. I was literally shaking from the fear. But what if they were trapped underground, and they heard your muffled footsteps and wanted to get your attention? They might have been more scared. Fountains of Wayne wrote a song about my mom. I once saw a tourist drop a €50 bill on the ground. I picked it up, ran after him and gave it back. To this day no one believes I did that. I'd do the same. Keep fighting the good fight. Sugar is scientifically proven not to increase hyperactivity in children. I have never met a parent that would believe this. I think many do believe that but don't want to feed their kids sugar and appreciate an extra excuse even if based on false info. I grew up in rural Australia. Our farm backed onto a very large and wild area of crown land. When I was 10 I stood and watched 2 mountain lions prowling along the back fence. There are not supposed to be mountain lions in Australia. Nobody believed me. They thought I was exaggerating, or I had seen a pair of large feral cats. But they weren't feral cats, they were mountain lions. I grew up out past Penrith, SW Sydney, and I promise you I saw a great big frick of mountain lion when I was about 8. I was walking along this track from my place to my auntie's house and this thing was sitting on a rock. I believe you, mate. On the night of my 8th birthday, I saw a large, 2-story, transparent box, possibly glass, filled with seated people that parked vertically into the water. My folks were at a kiosk, about 15 meters away, but the kiosk obscured their view. Location: the dock opposite the Liverbird building, River Mersey, Liverpool. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.